what are the key regulations and policies? What are the potential risks? What are some of the not so popular green energy stocks? Why is the green energy sector lagging behind the energy sector? We are happy that a lot of you have reached out with very interesting questions, which I'm happy to answer. Our team has put up this small case which focuses on themes which are very important, just not financially, but also for the global economy, which is the energy transition, also the EV vehicles, and the recycling theme. These are the three components which our theme has, and we believe that they are serving a big purpose in terms of what the future needs of our planet and also the financial world would be. So, with that, I'll just take one by one the questions that you have and try to answer them. What are the key regulations and policies, political developments that investors need to be aware, encouraged by when investing in the Indian energy sector? So, it's a interesting question, and you need to understand that, as I told you, that the challenge also, the major challenge is also regulatory, right? So if you look at the Indian regulations, you have to take in cognizance of the fact that we in India, the regulatory is still emerging. We don't have emerged policies like there are there in the Western economies, right? So there is always this regulatory risk where whenever there is a large change, it changes a lot of things on ground, and that in a way has a lot of repercussions. So, for example, there was a regulation in terms of PLI that is introduced, right? Which is in a way is a very good opportunity also, but there is still a lot of back and forth calculations. Still, people don't have clarity. The announcement has happened almost a year back, but the movement is still pretty slow, right? So, the regulations in terms of what the government wants and what it wants to achieve in ground has a lot of friction, and that needs to be understood, and that is very, very important to understand, because that is where a very large opportunity also can be created for economy once the regulatory standpoint is very clear. The regulation has now also allowed a lot of open access power projects where they are giving freedom to from charges which if they put up the projects, and that is where it is fueling a lot of capacity enhancement. Because please understand, if there is a factory in Gujarat which wants to maybe use power, but we don't have a surplus land in Gujarat, but there is in Maharashtra where surplus land is there, and there you can manufacture the power, or the sun is more, energy is more over there, so you produce power in one area and you want to supply it to the other area, but the government used to charge a lot of open access charges, which now the government is reducing, and in fact is giving a lot of exemptions to large projects where you can put up the capacities more than 100 500 megawatts capacities at a single place. Then you are waived off those charges, which is a very significant regulatory step which the government has taken, which will fuel a lot of capacity enhancement in this space, and will allow a lot of corporates to make tie-ups with large power manufacturers based out of the whole country, wherever they're getting the best rates, and that friction of charges will go away. Case in point, take example of Reliance, which has this huge, you can say, refineries, and they have this huge renewable energy plans also. But Reliance alone, if you look at, would require 100 gigawatts of power to fuel its own energy needs. Currently, India has 100 gigawatts of installed power, right? And Reliance alone is wanting to use 100 gigawatts of green energy in terms of green hydrogen. But if you want to produce green hydrogen, then the installation, the power has to be from solar, right? Then only it can be called green hydrogen, or else the hydrogen that is getting generated from other sources will not serve the purpose because it is not green. So if you look at what Reliance alone can do in terms of manufacturing large solar capacities, which they are using in-house, forget about selling it in the outside market, is as big as an opportunity as India is currently having. So we have these large corporate houses like the Tatas, the Reliances, the Birlas of the world, which is huge capacities in terms of their energy needs. If they are wanting to move towards the net zero targets in the coming decade, it will create a lot of opportunities in this space. And the regulations would help these things to get accomplished on the right track. Similarly, there was an announcement of PLI of around 20,000 crores in terms of the government, which again is a very good regulatory step in terms of encouraging a lot of manufacturing of solar power equipments, and end to end from solar ingot to the solar module itself, where solar cell or the ingot and maybe the polysilicon itself would be made in India. That's a significant step in terms of increasing the competitiveness of our country in terms of the Chinese modules, and that clarity, if it emerges, again, it can boost that productivity and also put India on the map of global players, right? Again, government regulations are encouraging use of smart meters, solar power pumps. So there are a lot of these regulations which have the intention which is correct. The only problem that we feel is that the execution on ground sometimes takes a lot of time, or the clarity of the regulation, if it is communicated in a better way. Whatever interactions we've had with the industry, the entrepreneurs don't want that you make everything free for us, or you make everything, or you open the door of every investment for us. The industry wants stability of regulation, right? You should not have very lax regulation one year and then very tight regulation the other year, then relax something, then again tighten something. That creates a lot of volatility in terms of the entrepreneur's mind also. So even if you want to give tighter regulations, or if you want to give lesser stops, but give it in a very straightforward manner or a smooth manner over a long period of time. So that will go a long way in terms of improving the dynamics of this sector and the success of this sector for sure. So that is one thing that investors should always look for, is that the regulations are going in that direction, or the political developments are making them a lot of volatile transactions, and that in a way reduces the overall investment in the sector. What are the potential risks associated with investing in renewable energy projects in India? So the potential risk, if you talk about, the first risk that emanates is again from the regulatory standpoint, which I guess we've discussed in detail. A lot of things, though the intention is right, but the speed of execution from the government part is sometimes creating a lot of confusion. I touched upon the ALMM, which is again a risk that has now been thrown to the you can say solar power manufacturer, where now it has been delayed by a couple of years, which was last year approved, and a lot of people planned their capacities because of that, and now they are in jeopardy because they don't know whether the government is even serious to implement it 2 years from now, because they promised something and now they're taking it away because they were facing a short-term problem where the power cost would have gone up in India because the imported material is cheaper and Indian module manufacturer didn't have that kind of competence. But then it becomes a chicken and egg conundrum, where if you don't give scale to the Indian manufacturers, how will they reduce cost? And if you keep on importing, then the scale would never come. Second is again the interest rate risk, as I talked about. The interest rates around the world have been going up, and also in India. So if they go to a tipping point where these projects become maybe unviable, then the offtake of these projects can be very weak. So that is another risk. Another potential risk, if I look at, is also if you look at terms of the foreign investments, right? So what has happened in the US has a big repercussion in terms of the investments that were coming to India. So the deals that were happening, or the money that was being pumped into our country in terms of executing the projects, has also reduced substantially in the past maybe 5-6 months. Though it remains to be seen whether it's a long-term trend or a short-term trend. It looks more like a short-term trend, but once things stabilize, the recession fears are out, a lot of funds can again come in our country and chase these projects. What are some of the not so popular green energy stocks? And if I talk about not so popular companies, and we always in our strategy have said, you look at ancillary companies, right? It is always that people want to look at, if we talk about green energy, or we talk about maybe EV batteries or EV theme, then people say we'll buy a two-wheeler manufacturer, right? Ke EV theme chalega, so let's buy a two-wheeler manufacturer. But it never works like that, because a two-wheeler manufacturer has hundreds of startups which are burning its cash to basically, take the market share. And hence, for one company to become successful, whether Ola would be successful, or there's a listed company which is Greaves Cotton, which also has Ampere as its brand, whether that'll be successful, very difficult for me to take a call, right? Hence, we always say that if you want to play a theme, it's better to play through ancillaries, right? So if you look at, a lot of ancillaries have done so well and should do also well going forward in terms of green energy or renewable energy space also. Case in point, look at a company called Apar Industries, which is a company which was into traditional products, but also is focusing on products which are like the renewable energy cables, where it is almost a leader in India and it's exporting a lot of cables to the US and other geographies, where in tough, you can say, environments like heat or very cold environments, you need these monomeric cables, where Apar is emerging as a very important player. Again, the transmitter requirement or the requirement of building a lot of new grid which is going to emerge would mean a lot of capex that will happen in the power sector, right? If you look at various divisions of a power, whenever the power capex in the world has gone up, a power has always benefited, right? There's a kind of a company which people had written off that this company would not do well because its order book is not growing, its margins are shrinking, things like that. But that has completely changed its trajectory because of the world having a power deficit, which in a way people need to increase the power capacities around the world, and the focus in renewables, which APAR had newer products to address that. So these are the incremental changes sometimes which make a lot of difference, right? So if these divisions of APAR provided an incremental, you can say, profitability, the market was completely surprised because people were writing off the story of APAR, right? And the market cap had just fallen by 50-60% and was not doing good for almost 7-8 years, and completely changed its trajectory. And the stock is up almost 3-4x in the past 1.5 years because of the developments that have happened, right? Similarly, if you look at companies like a Triveni Turbine, which are making turbines where 50% of the turbines are going for renewable energy or bagasse-based energy or those kind of green energy projects, and export is a very big market for them. And post-COVID, because they could not go and meet their clients and complete a lot of deals, that is where the execution took a hit, and the stock was available at a very reasonable market cap. But people were very apprehensive in terms of why the order book is not growing and what will happen to the future and things like that. If you look at now past 2 quarters, when their execution has improved, their order books are improved, the stock has moved up by almost 70-80%. So these are the kind of companies where, again, in the space of solar module manufacturing or solar, you can say EPC, there are some listed companies. For example, there is Vari RTL, which in a way is executing a lot of EPC contracts, and from a meager 100-200 megawatt kind of execution that they're doing, they're going to 500-600 crores, 600 megawatt kind of order book they have, which in a way can change the complete fortunes of the company and grow the company in the coming 4-5 years at a very big scale if that space keeps on happening. So these are some lesser discussed or lesser known stocks which I believe have done well, can do well going forward also. Why is the green energy sector lagging behind the energy sector? So I guess this question is not proper, because it is not lagging the energy sector. The green energy space, in fact, if you look at, as I told in India also, if you look at the energy is growing at just 2-3% in terms of the non-renewable part, or maybe the thermal power capacities. The renewable energy is growing at 30-35%. So it's just that it was degrowing. The thermal power capacities were degrowing, and now they've come back on the growth path because of the huge shortage of power. Governments around the world have realized that we cannot completely wait for renewable capacities to come. So meanwhile, renewable is taking time for coming on stream. The short-term needs that we have and the needs that got created by a lot of supply disruptions in the world. For example, in Europe, the gas shortage completely after the war surprised them, and hence they had to open up their non-renewable capacities or the thermal power capacities again. But that is not the path that they've taken. That this is again going back to the era where we'll have thermal capacities to be the large portion of our economy. The trend has started towards renewable, and the growth of renewable is still far higher everywhere around the world. It's just that thermal, which was not growing or degrowing, has also grown, but just a meager 3-4-5% take here and there, where they are now wanting to plug that gap of the power which the world needs. Is this sector good for the short-term investment? See, no investment, I'd say, is good for short-term investing, right? Because in the short term, there is always regulatory risk. There's always a risk if US recession. You don't know, right? Even if I like a company a lot, but if it is supplying, for example, Triveni is supplying a lot in the US and the European markets, and if there's a recession over there, then its order book can suffer, right? And hence, I will never recommend, if you want to look at the shorter term time frame to invest in this sector. This is a decadal theme. In fact, a theme which will run multiple decades till maybe 2040-50, where a lot of these energy transition would become significant.